Today's headline. A sleep-deprived AP Gov student makes an under-researched video essay about USAID because her civic action project is due tomorrow.
The real headline is that 80% of USAID federal programs have been cut. Where did they go? What happened to them? Why would we cut them in the first place? What did they do in the first place? Why does USAID exist?
What is USAID? Why do I exist? Who am I?
All these are important questions, and these questions should definitely not be answered in an AP Gov civic action project. Nevertheless, I will attempt to answer them today for you. In other words, you're going to listen to me yap about a project that I have done minimal research on. However, I have lots of thoughts and opinions, and I think it's very important, and I think you should think it's very important too. So, I have my funny hat on, and I'm going to tell you about USAID. Welcome to the channel where I, Belle, attempt to have relatively nuanced takes. Balanced, if you will. But of course, I've been evading the question, what is USAID? How can I convince you that you should support it and you should oppose the recent actions to undermine its work abroad? Well, to answer the question, what is USAID? USAID is an independent government agency and the principal U.S. organization responsible for administering tens of billions of dollars in humanitarian aid overseas per year. Now, where did that come from? Why did we do this? How did we end up doing tens of billions of dollars of helping people abroad? Well, you may be wondering why I'm wearing a red hat, and you may think that certainly doesn't connect to why we're doing tens of billions of dollars of helping people abroad. However, I would say it connects very directly because, like most things in American history, communism. President John F. Kennedy created USAID via executive order at the height of the Cold War in 1961, based on authority provided in the 1961 Foreign Assistance Act to counter Soviet influence abroad. If you're like me, you might be thinking, John F. Kennedy, what are you thinking? How is providing people handouts going to stop them from liking communism? That seems kind of contrarian, antithetical, whatever you want to call it. And to be honest, I don't know. So, I did what any reasonable person would do when they don't know something, and I asked AI. After asking AI, I also read an article from the conversation, and I think I have it figured out. So let me try to explain it to you. This is you. You're poor. And you live in an underfunded country, maybe a country that just went through a war, maybe a country that is just overall having problems. To you, the red hat looks very appealing. It looks like something that could solve all your problems, magically whisk away all the crises of money and not having enough to eat, and red hat promises you that if you just agree to live under the red hat's control, all of your worries will be alleviated. Remember, you're poor, and that is very appealing to you. But to Mr. JFK over here, I don't know why he's a green pencil, to Mr. JFK, that's very unappealing. He wants to limit red hat's influence. He doesn't want it to spread all across the world. That's antithetical to his values. So what does he do? You want food. You want sustainable jobs. You want health care. All of these things that red hat promises you. So let's back it up a bit. Here's a good point to provide some context. According to Christian Ruth, an expert in USAID, specifically its history, from a foreign policy standpoint, USAID's greatest contribution to American influence abroad has always been its intangible soft power effects. It helps to create an image of the U.S. as a positive, helpful world power worth partnering with. Red Hat can offer you things, but you know who can also offer you things? Green pencil. And if you have your basic needs being met, you have food, you have shelter, you have no violence and other fun things, you're more likely to say, maybe capitalism isn't so bad. Maybe I don't need to be under the red hat to be thriving. Because at the end of the day, communism thrives off a deep sense of dissatisfaction with the current systems. It's completely radically different from anything that capitalism offers. But if you are living under capitalism and you're not doing so bad, you'd be a lot less likely to think of that as an appealing solution. that's all well and good, but how do we get from the 1960s to today? We've eliminated the influence of the Red Hat. Well, not really, but let's pretend we did. And now, here we are, and Donald Trump, who is definitely not a Red Hatter, is saying that we should get rid of USAID. We should stop aiding the poor, impoverished poor of the world. Instead, we should just not give out handouts or anything really. Life-saving care, it doesn't matter. We're not giving it out because it's not our job. Between the 1960s and today, a lot of changes have happened in the USAID department. It's gone from being really focused on the needs of the poor to being really focused on economic development and promoting the foreign policy interests of the US to kind of both, and today it's kind of landed at a medium ground. This is a graph that I really find helpful. It outlines where the spending for USAID is going today. Today, the largest portions of USAID go to economic development, health, and humanitarian assistance. Close behind that is peace and security. Lesser expenses are program support, democracy, human rights and governance, environment, education and social services, and multi-sector. So it's pretty balanced as a mix of a lot of different important things. Another important thing to consider is that it's really not that much of our budget. It only makes up around 1%. A little less, a little more, depending on whether you're looking at foreign aid as a whole or USAID specifically. The thing is, 1% isn't nothing, and to a lot of people it seems like more than it is. And at the end of the day, it does seem like something needs to go. Not in regards to USAID, but I'm talking American spending as a whole. The modern green man who's in the office really thinks that everything needs to go, and it needs to go now. The problem is that a lot of the things we do are really important. And that's really the problem with government cuts as a whole. We know we need to cut things. I mean, take a look at the national debt. It's going up very fast, and it doesn't appear to be going down, and it's a lot of money. You can go back and forth about whether or not the national debt really matters. Like, can't we just keep having it go up forever? And to be honest, I'm not an economist, so maybe it can go up forever. But from what I know about debt, we do need to think about it, probably, and hopefully stabilize it. And in the long run, I don't think it can go up forever, because currencies are really just structures that we've agreed to operate under, things that we believe in. And if America is in huge amounts of debt in our currency, does our currency really matter if it's not being backed up by a government that
Has money?
debt? Economic debt can just go up forever and ever and ever. Amen. Essentially, though, the broad understanding is that something needs to go. So what do we cut? Where does the going come from? At the end of the day, a lot of our money goes to health, it goes to defense, it goes to social security. These are all things that most people would say aren't that bad. So the question is, where do we cut the money from? What has to be pulled out of the Jenga tower so it can weigh less? That's a very bad analogy. So the current administration under Donald Trump and Elon Musk have been very focused on government efficiency. They've been cutting programs left, right, and center. But the problem is that this has also been coupled with increases in defense spending and not huge raises in taxes, which makes sense because he did run on the platform of, I'm not going to raise taxes. But the problem is when it comes to budget deficits, what you need to do to decrease the deficit is to decrease spending and increase taxes. And nobody likes either of those. So no one really likes decreasing deficits. So we have huge astronomical debt because we live in a democracy, not a pragmatism. Pragmatisy? That sounds really bad. I'm not here to convince you that the national debt is a huge problem. As I mentioned, I'm not an economist, and I'm not here to convince you
That Doge is right or wrong. Well, I think they're wrong, but I'm not here to convince you of that. I'm here to convince you that when we cut money, when we take things out of the Jenga tower, we shouldn't be cutting USAID. Even though it's tempting and we feel like, why is our money, why are our dollars going to the poor people of the world? Shouldn't they be going to us? We have poor people here, we have problems here. What's wrong with this? What the heck, right? It seems like we should be spending our money on ourselves. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I think the way that we fundamentally perceive of nation states is missing a piece. Or maybe a couple pieces, or maybe an entire border.
of pieces. If you all are familiar with the rhetoric around USAID and the news stories being spread, I'm sure you've seen the utterly horrific accounts of all the people who have suffered from USAID. I said that wrong. They didn't suffer from USAID, they suffered from the cutting of USAID funding. But these stories talk about children who are suffering from malnutrition, who don't have access to care. They talk about displaced people and how they don't have access to essential medication. They talk about children and how these children are suffering from medical conditions that maybe can't be treated with the healthcare systems of the countries that they're in. They talk about the humanitarian aid that's being stalled. They talk about how medicine is present, but they're not allowed to actually use it or spread it or give it to people because of the freezes and the cuts and the departments' closures, right? They talk about essentially how people are suffering and dying because of the cuts in USAID. And I'm not here to counter that rhetoric or say it's wrong or incorrect or that we shouldn't be talking about those things. It's obviously very, very important that we talk about the actual impacts of the programs that we have and the things that we create. But here's the thing. I don't think those stories really address the problems that MAGA and Republicans and Donald Trump and Elon Musk have with USAID. People are dying. People are suffering. That's really, really bad. But the critique that people have always had with USAID isn't that it isn't doing good work, but that that work is not our job. It's not our work to do. Now, you can call that silly or say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Of course, humanitarian work is our work to do. But it's not that clear to everyone. Republicans will point to internal problems within America and say, why are we spending this money abroad when we have people within our own country who don't have access to healthcare, or they don't have access to food, or they don't have access to good jobs? Now, not all Republicans are that progressive in their values about what needs to change within America, but if someone does provide you a convincing argument for why things like USAID need to end, they're probably going to start citing internal problems within America and say, we need to take care of our own first. We can't worry about this guy when the people under this guy have problems. And what are we going to do about those problems if we're giving millions of dollars of free handouts to people around the world? Shouldn't that money go to us? Shouldn't it go to our poor, our impoverished, our suffering? Those are the people that are under our jurisdiction. Shouldn't a country be concerned with its own people? I'm not saying we should stop talking about all the problems that cutting USAID funding has created. We need to talk about the violence that isn't going to end. We need to talk about tuberculosis. We need to talk about infectious diseases and Ebola and HIV and AIDS and peacemaking efforts and democracy and infrastructure and everything that this is influencing. But if we can't even defend spending money on foreign countries at all, what does it serve to talk about all the benefits of doing it? Now, that may seem contradictory. Aren't the benefits the reason why we should be doing foreign aid in the first place? But remember, we're operating under the assumption that our budget desperately needs to be cut. Now, all that's left to do is decide where that money comes from. So why not focus on helping ourselves before we help other people? Isn't that basic logic? Isn't that the point of nations? This brings us to the very important question in regards to USAID and foreign aid as a whole. What is the obligation of a nation? And is it different than our obligations as people? So I'm here and I'm supposed to tell you exactly what the obligations of a nation are. I'm supposed to use my divine video essay inspiration and tell you why we should include USAID in how we define the role of a country. But I'm going to talk about something that I think is a little bit more interesting than that. Why have nations at all? That sounds crazy. It is crazy. And no, it's not very well thought out. Because this project is due tomorrow. Now, to be clear, I don't think that we should just get rid of borders and get rid of nations and never do that whole thing again. But philosophically, what purpose do nations really serve? Why do we have to believe that a nation has certain interests? What's the point? On his first day in office, when Trump signed an executive order that announced a 90-day freeze on U.S. foreign development and assistance, he said that United States foreign aid and bureaucracy are not aligned with American interests and in many cases antithetical to American values. Now, you could obviously disagree with this on the basis that from the beginning, USAID has been opposed to the Red Hat, which is one of the most fundamental of American interests. But I think there's a more going on here. Why should we even care what American interests are? What is America? America is a country. Now, I'm sure that's the insightful criticism that you came here to see. But yeah, it's a country. It's a place with borders. It's a place that we collectively believe exists. And it exists because we believe it exists. The borders are, places that we patrol and guard, etc., etc. And we have procedures for how people can cross them. And we have all these ideas about citizenship. But that's what they are, ideas. And just because we do things to protect the ideas or to, physically embody the ideas, they only exist because at some point in time we decided that they do exist and we collectively follow them, believe in them. That's what makes countries real. But the paradox of the nation is that since we believe it exists, we also believe things to be true about it. And one of those things is that a nation somehow has different interests or different purposes than we as individuals.
So here's the thesis of my video. I'm telling you it's the thesis of my video because I don't want you to be confused.
Get ready for the dramatic video essayist voice. To propose that nations are somehow liable to different moral obligations than humans is to create needless distance between the whole and the people of that whole. So what do I mean by this? Am I crazy? Yes, I am crazy. It's 10 o'clock at night and this project is due tomorrow. Oh my god. Nations, however, are fundamentally just groups of geographically adjacent people. We're just people who live next to each other, who decided that our adjacency means something. It means that we're a nation. But we also live in a democracy, and democratic governments are designed to serve the people. I did take AP Gov. Therefore, whatever we promote as human morality, we ought to also promote as the morality of the institutions that we live in. At least if you ask me, because that just makes sense. If I think that I should help the poor and the needy and the homeless abroad, why would I believe that the whole that I am a part of should not also do those things? If I don't think the whole that I'm a part of should do those things, it calls into question whether I really believe that I should do those things, if those things aren't obligations for a group. Nations and states are simply an extended version of the prioritization of the self over the other. What I mean by this is that we as individuals are highly susceptible to selfishness. I'm sure you all are aware. We want to look out for me. I want to look out for my own food, my own shelter, my own everything, right? And we know as people that we are at our best when we are not just looking out for ourselves, but also the people around us. But nation states are kind of a paradox because they give us the illusion of looking out for other people when in reality we're just looking out for an extended version of ourselves. When people say America should care about Americans, it sounds like they really care about other people, those other Americans. But as identifying as part of the whole, what they're really saying is the whole should care about the whole. It shouldn't care about what's outside of the whole. It should just care about itself. And because I'm part of the whole, it's my responsibility to advocate for that internal focus, that selfishness, that care. But if it's so clear that selfishness on a personal basis is wrong, why are we so confused about whether it's wrong for a nation to be selfish? As I suggested, I think it's because of the distance that a nation creates. It's so much bigger than us as individuals, so it's a little bit difficult for us to see our human morality amplified on the scale that it needs to be amplified to apply it to nations. Now you may be wondering, why do I think that we shouldn't be selfish? Shouldn't we just be selfish? Maybe we should. But I could have made this a 15-second short on YouTube about how USAID is important, and I could have linked a donation link, but no, I didn't decide to be that selfish, even though it means I'm probably going to pull an all-nighter and I have my AP Lit exam tomorrow. No. I'm here explaining to you why we shouldn't be selfish, which, probably not selfish, I don't really know at this point, I talk too much. What I'm trying to convince you of, though, isn't that we shouldn't be selfish. If you think that we should be selfish, you can be selfish, and you can advocate for politicians and leaders and people who are selfish. What I'm saying is that We should advocate for our personal beliefs to be amplified to the scale of our governments. If we think personally that you or me or us, we should not be selfish on a personal basis, we should also vote for policies and advocate for leaders who also believe that. If on a personal basis, you're a bitch, you can advocate for your nation as a whole to be bitchy. Please, Miss Regal, if you made this far in the video, then I'm really sorry. Don't take off points because I said a swear word. However, to advocate for one thing on a personal basis with your friends and your family and your community, but a completely different thing on the scale of the nation, really calls into question, everything. Whether you believe what you say you believe. And everybody wants moral continuity. That's the point of this video, moral continuity. We should all be continuous, continuous in our morality. Is there even a reason not to be selfish, though? Why not? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whatever you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. Blessed are the peacemakers, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Okay, before I lose the plot, that's what I mean. I'm Christian, and I have Christian morality, and I believe that everyone is made in the image and likeness of God, and how I treat others is essentially how I'm treating the image of God in that person. But I'm not here to convince you to be Christian, or to evangelize you, or to explain my faith or why I believe. I'm saying that part of me being Christian is to try to have moral continuity with the belief that I technically, philosophically believe, and the one that I embody in my personal life, and the policies and the people that I vote for, and the things that I support. I wish I was a dictator. And you may be wondering, is that what you got from AP Gov? You wish you were a dictator? And yes, I do wish I was a dictator, because I do think that I'm smarter and better than everyone else in the world. I'm dead serious. I am better. I'm superior. I'm the best. But unfortunately, just being the best isn't enough to qualify you for being in charge. So, this is my attempt to shout into the void of the content on the internet and challenge a few more people to ask, what are the consequences of the separation that I create between myself and the other? How do I use institutions such as a nation to separate myself from other people? How do I use such institutions to create an us versus them dynamic? And even if that dynamic is created, what do I believe about how we should treat the other? And am I adequately applying that to my political beliefs? Who do the groups that I'm a part of allow to be part of self? And who do they leave out of self? Who's part of us and who's them? And if you aren't me, are you worthy of my love, attention, and money? If not, why? So if we believe in the erasure of these boundaries, the melding of the self and the other, we must also support the policies that use our resources, our abilities, our money, our taxpayer dollars, and our systems to support the other. Because in fact, who are we to say who the other really is? Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I don't think I'm going to get any sleep tonight.